Hello everyone, Cameroni here with a finished build guide, or at least the first iteration of a build guide for Navira's Fracturing, Disciple of Varashta. This build, in a nutshell, you cold infuse Ice Nova to create big chilled ground, you blow up the chilled ground. You rinse and you repeat. Going a bit deeper, we also use Frost Bomb and Curse Auras to massively increase the damage enemies take, and Frost Bomb also generates the infusions needed to create chilled ground. These auras and chilled ground also massively debuff the enemies, making their action speed hilarious. We also grab Kalari, another djinn, to give us some skills to intersperse the chilled ground explosion with, since it has a decent cooldown. These also give the enemies critical weakness and also do a good amount of damage by themselves. This further increases the damage that enemies take. And to rub salt in the wound, we're also reducing the enemy's action speed, like I mentioned, by an incredible amount. And since we scale our djinn's damage with minion damage and not our own damage, we can fit in tons of tank passives and tank stats on gear. So even if a mob does manage to hit us, it doesn't matter. Look at the effort they have to put in here, and it's all for nothing. Poor mobs. All this comes together to make a fantastic feeling build. It's easy to play, it's tanky, it's fun, it's funny, and there are giant cold explosions. All of my favorite things. Now that said, I'll jump into all of the more in-depth nerd mechanics and gear and whatnot. I won't bust out the spreadsheets this time, but know that I have them. I'll add chapters, so feel free to skip around. Moving on to build mechanics, we'll start with damage. Nothing that affects your damage will help your damage in this build. That's kind of confusing, so I'll explain. Things like spell damage, spell levels, increased damage, damage is extra damage, damage to frozen enemies, etc. All of that is worthless as far as the djinn are concerned. The djinn are fickle gods and goddesses, and they demand special damage. We're scaling our damage with increases to minion damage, which is conveniently what I just finished doing in POE1 with Absolution for 0.4. We are also scaling our damage with minion skill gem levels. On top of that, increases to damage, and crit chance to allies in our presence, which includes the djinn. Also minion damage if we've hit recently, which we pretty much will always have hit recently. And then we're using our own spells for some mad utility and defenses. What utility are we getting from our spells, you might ask? Number one, Curse Auras. We get 59% temp chains. I think I can push that up to 60% for temp chains and elemental weakness on white mobs. It's less for magic, rare, and unique enemies. It goes down to 50% less effect on unique enemies. But it is still quite strong. The chill plus temp chains plus hinder practically freezes mobs in place. Number two, exposure. We can get a crap ton of exposure on mobs. The calculation for all of this real quick, since I said I won't bust out the spreadsheets. 60% exposure from Frost Bomb. Since there are 10 pulses, each pulse does 20%. It has 20% by default, and we have Spell Cascade, which means the pulses overlap if it hits correctly. Frost Bomb has a maximum exposure of 60% if you add 20% quality to it. So with 10 pulses, so 20% by default, 10 pulses for 20%, and with Spell Cascade, those 10 pulses are actually 20 to 30 pulses, depending on how big the mob is and how well it hits. It all adds up to 60%. That's all you need to know. So we get 60% exposure from Frost Bomb. And just in case it doesn't overlap well, we also have our Fire Djinn buddy to inflict his own exposure, which I believe stacks with ours as far as I can tell. It is pretty hard to tell because there's so much going on the screen and so many numbers moving and changing, and the boss is always doing things, so he's there just in case. Makes me feel better. Nice little safety blanket in case we don't get enough exposure from Frost Bomb. And we had a free ascendancy point. Anyway, 60% exposure. Stripped defenses on the passive tree increases this to 65% exposure. We get 70% exposure effect on the passive tree. You can get 100% with an anoint, but I like the armor and energy shield I'm getting from my current anoint, so I'm just leaving it as it is. 70% is plenty. We get 20% increased exposure effect from a support gem. We get 49% from our belt. All of that adds up to 139% exposure effect. So we multiply 65, because that's the exposure that we're inflicting, by 2.39, which equals 155. Then you add the 59% from elemental weakness, which brings us to 214. We are reducing enemy resistances on white mobs by 214%. That is a lot. This gets cut in This gets cut in half for unique enemies, though, aka bosses. So that brings us down to 107%. Bosses have 50% resistance by default, so we're taking them to negative 57%, which is not bad. Not bad at all. Could eke out a little bit more if we do the anoint on the amulet, but like I said, I'll think about it. Now you could just get Rakiata's Flow instead, but that's really expensive. And if you do, you really only need it on Navira since our damage doesn't matter on anything else. And the Kalari Djinn does physical damage, so it doesn't do anything there either. You could also drop the Fire Djinn if you grab Rakiata's Flow, since he's inflicting exposure, and you don't want exposure if you're doing Rakiata's Flow. And grab another Navira skill or Kalari skill. Navira as well looks strong. Kalari's Deception looks really strong for trash clearing. I'll leave it up to you, and I'd love to hear what you do if you decide to go the Rakiata's Flow route. There's also like a 50% chance at least that Rakiata's Flow will be bugged and not work with the Djinn skill. I have found and reported quite a few bugs this league, like Kurgle's Leash. That would be such a good support on the Djinn, but alas, it doesn't work. Let's move on to defenses now. That's where we really have a good time on this build. Since there are so many useless item affixes out there that everyone else wants and we don't, we get pretty cheap gear. And we can also focus much more on defenses. Also, since most of the passive tree damage increases are useless to us, we can focus on defenses on the passive tree as well, among other things. Like hitting the cap for slows on mobs. Fun fact, there is a cap and you can hit it. Look at these cute little guys, moving in slow motion. So slow that my ES recharge starts in between them hitting me. So slow that I can just sprint endlessly without needing to worry about getting tripped by mobs, because by the time they finally do attack, I am long gone. And if we do get hit, well, we can tank it. For this build, we're stacking armor and energy shield, and normally I'd go CI, but there isn't a good reason to on this, unless I'm planning on doing some chaos damage heavy content, but even then, I'm pretty sure we can tank it. We're also using Bark Skin, which synergizes ridiculously well with this Ascendancy node, Sacred Rituals. POB has been updated, but I'm not sure that it's implementing this node correctly, and it probably needs more testing, a lot more testing. But in my testing so far, which is just how do I feel about it, and what does it look like, this node feels incredible. The fizz damage I take seems to be massively reduced. We also get faster start of ES recharge, faster recharge rate when on low ES, and an incredible 40% increased ES from the small Ascendancy nodes, and this other node up here. The faster start of ES recharge when on low ES is another reason I didn't want to go CI, since this will be a lot more useful if we have a health pool to help tank past the ES pool if all of our ES is gone, because we'll get faster recharge in that case, and we won't be dead. That's the important part. I thought about using a shield instead of a focus as well for even more defenses, but I feel defensive enough. TBH, that doesn't ever happen to me in POE2. So it's a pretty good feeling. Pretty good feeling. Moving on. Let's talk about gear next and the important mods you want to look for or craft yourself. Since nobody's crafting this stuff because they hate us. Also more likely because it's not used for anything except what we're doing. There are two important desecrated mods that you want to look out for to help your damage out, since scaling damage on this build is difficult. The biggest one, and the most expensive part of this build by far, is +2 minion skills on a focus. This is really expensive to hit. I spent about 15 div on my focus, and purchasing a similar one is 30 div. This should be one of the last things you go for probably, since it's by far the most expensive piece. Also, your damage is fine without it. It's for the min-maxing. It does help your damage quite a bit, but I was running 6 mod tier 15 maps deathless without it, and I cleared tier 3 pinnacle bosses without it, so it is one of those nice to have things and important to have, but that's your chase item. That's what you want to go for once you have everything else in line. The second desecrated mod is minion damage if you've been hit recently on rings. You can also get it on an amulet, but amulets have so many good mods that I don't know if it's worth a mod on an amulet. And like I said earlier, you should pretty much have always hit recently, so these help quite a bit in the minion damage department. Now let's move on to each gear piece and go over specifics on them. We'll start with the helmet, since it's at the top. I debated and I did some math and some soul searching. I went on a journey, if you will, on whether or not I wanted a high armor helm, high ES helm, or a hybrid helm. And I finally decided on a high energy shield helm because Illuminated Crown on the passive tree with our ascendancy is better than Runic Helm. With a high armor helm, we could reasonably get 1500 armor, which is about 190 ES that you'd get from the Runic Helm node on the tree. Or we can get around 600 ES on a helmet, which becomes about 1000 with Illuminated Crown. And with our ascendancy, this translates to 600 armor from the helmet, and that is before any increases or reduction to energy shield, by the way, and we are increasing our energy shield by a lot, so it's actually more than 600 armor. But that's just base. We're going for base stats on this. That said, a high armor helmet would still be good, especially if it is significantly cheaper than a high ES helmet, since these are kind of expensive. It may be even better than a high ES helmet if you're not going for the Sacred Rituals Ascendancy node. I don't know. Yeah, it would need tested. An armor ES hybrid helmet is also not worth it, in my opinion. I do think it would be better than a just straight high armor helmet, but you would need to take both Runic Helm and Illuminated Crown, which we're pathing by all of them anyway, so it's not a huge deal. But a well-rolled, not max-rolled, but well-rolled hybrid helm would give you around 260 energy shield, which becomes around 440 with the passive tree node, and about 750 armor. And then you add another 94 ES from Runic Helm. I know this is getting complicated, but I'm not busting out the spreadsheet, don't worry. So the final numbers on a hybrid helmet, this is what you need to know. There's around 530 energy shield and 750, well, 1,070-ish armor when all is said and done from all the passive tree nodes, the Sacred Rituals Ascendancy node, etc. 530 ES and 1,070 armor on a hybrid helm. A full armor helm is 1,615 armor and 190 ES, and a full ES helmet is 1,000 ES and 600 armor. The clear winner here is the pure energy shield helmet. Especially since we get way more increases to energy shield than we do to armor on the passive tree, so it makes sense to take the greater ES value here as well, which leads to even larger armor numbers from the Sacred Rituals node. Because we get 400% increase, or yeah, 400% increased energy shield, that 1,000 ES becomes 4,000 ES, and the 600 armor becomes 2,400 armor. Not that we're getting 400%, but I think we're getting close to that. Moving on. Amulet. The top mods are going to be plus to minion skills. That's your damage mod. That's the most important one on an amulet. Other nice ones are armor, energy shield, life, and resistances. Other good mods to mention are the desecrated ones for minion damage if you've hit recently, global defenses, exposure effect, minion cooldown, and aura skill magnitudes. Amulets have a ton of good possible mods. I'm sure you can find some at every budget level to fit what you need and what you want. You can also just go for the old plus to minion skills with a whole crap ton of resistances and defenses on it. Whatever you want to do. The amulet's pretty easy to get. Next on the list is rings. The desecrated mod for minion damage if you've hit recently, which I mentioned previously. And the only two other prefixes that are useful are life and rarity. None of the other prefixes do anything at all for us. We don't need the mana. We don't need added damage on hit. None of that's helpful. So the suffixes can be resistance, they can be rarity, they can be attributes if you need more attributes. Crafting these rings is super easy. Just find a magic base that has two good mods on it. I'm pretty sure went for a rarity prefix and a resistance suffix. It's like on one ring I went for fire res, the other I went for chaos res, and then I went for rarity on both of them. The rarity, and then I hit it with a rarity essence, the opulence one. That will always give a rarity suffix, so you get double rarity on the rings. And then you use the Omen of the Liege. I believe that's the right one that gives you Aminamu. And then you use the other Omen to guarantee a prefix. This will guarantee that you hit an Aminamu prefix. And since there are only 3 Aminamu prefixes, it will always have minion damage as an option when you go to unveil the ring in the Abyss Cave. I also use the Omen of Abyssal Echoes as well if I'm crafting an expensive ring or if I spend a lot on the base, so that I can re-roll the minion damage if it rolls low. And then you use Catalyst for whatever else you want, whether it's life or resistance. You Catalyst it, use the Catalyzing Omen and a Greater Exalted Orb to try and get what you want for the other 2 affixes and call it a day. So for instance, on my Fire Resistance ring, I used an Essence for rarity, then I got the minions deal increased damage if you've hit recently, and then I hit it with a whole bunch of life catalysts and the Omen of the Catalyst Omen and a Greater Exalt, and it hit lightning damage with attacks, which is unfortunate. Not life, but I had a higher chance to hit life. And then I did the same thing for resistances. I hit it with a bunch of Tool Catalysts and hit it with the Greater Exalt and the Catalyzing Omen, and it hit tier 2 all elemental resistances, which is awesome. So, rings, recommend crafting yourself. Pretty easy to do, pretty deterministic craft. Belt, I'm using Darkness Enthroned. There are not very many good belt affixes out there for us. You can get a lot of resistance, especially if you're on a low budget. You can use a rare belt for a ton of resistance, some life, some armor, some attributes maybe. But we should have all of the resistance that we need on other gear, so you shouldn't need any, and you shouldn't need any extra attributes really. So the belt is easy. Moving on to boots. Boots are easy. I go hybrid armor ES on these, but you can also go straight armor. You don't want to go straight ES since you want armor to apply to elemental damage taken. You also want move speed on the boots and whatever else you feel like putting in there. Use it as build glue. Get resistances, get attributes, get whatever. High-end expensive boots, if we ever get there, we'll probably go for high defenses, armor applies to elemental damage, high move speed, the essence for increased effect of a socketed item, and then use the move speed socketable, I would assume, and maybe corrupt it or double corrupt it. But that's a ton of currency for not a ton of benefit, so we'll see. We'll see what we end up doing there. Gloves. You can use some rare gloves with good defenses and resistances, especially on a budget. Just buy some like 1 to 10x gloves. Maybe some ES recharge and / or rarity. Maybe some armor applies to elemental damage, whatever you want. Or you can use the Prisoner Manacle Gloves, which is what I am currently using, that I just put on and am still testing. But I think they feel awesome, especially since it helps us hit the slow cap for at least white mobs. Since our Ice Nova rarely ever freezes anyway, the line where you cannot immobilize enemies doesn't really matter. Our minion, the djinn, Navira, she can still freeze, so cannot immobilize enemies only applies to you, not Navira. So you can still freeze. And the beautiful sight of mobs being reduced to this makes me happy. There are increased slow magnitude nodes close to where we path on the passive tree too. So if you want the best of both worlds with better slows and rare gloves, you can go for those. Or if you just want to really, really, really slow everything down, you can grab those too, along with these unique gloves. But I think these gloves are fine, so long as you don't need the extra defensive stats, or rarity, or resistance, or anything. And these gloves are mega cheap. Moving on to our chest, you just want good defensive stats like all the other gear pieces. If you aren't able to get Spirit on a Sceptre, then you can opt in to get it on your chest, but I wouldn't. I'd rather have the defenses. Or get the Desecrated mod for Spirit Efficiency, since I believe that's a suffix, which doesn't matter as much. You want your 3 prefixes to be high defense, optimally. The suffixes don't matter so much. Get some resistance, get armor applies to elemental damage, get whatever you want there. Moving on to the Sceptre. This one is a bit more expensive, but still not too bad. Especially if you opt for a +3 base instead of +4, which is what I did because I'm poor. Or you can buy a bunch of white bases to perfect trans and aug until you hit some good stuff. It's up to you. The most important mod on a Sceptre is plus to minion skills. Following that, allies in your presence having increased damage, crit bonus, and crit chance are the best. Some additional spirit so you can run all your auras is also really, really nice. And I'd go with either the Discipline Sceptre or the Malice Sceptre. I went Discipline since we already inflict critical weakness with Kalari, but you can always inflict more. And I like having all of the extra energy shield. Moving on to the focus. On a budget, you can also swap this out with a shield. The only somewhat useful vanilla mod for helping our damage is cast speed, so we're slowed less when we're casting Ice Nova or Frost Bomb. I think it also slightly helps our minion command speed, but it's not a huge deal, and that's really the only somewhat useful vanilla mod for helping our damage. So really all you want on a focus is high ES, some resistances, maybe some recharge rate or faster start of recharge. The GG endgame focus, what we talked about earlier, you want high energy shield, ES recharge rate, and / or faster start of energy shield recharge, and +2 to minion skills. Like I said, getting +2 to minion skills is really hard to hit. It has a really low weighting. I eventually started using ancient ribs instead of preserved ribs to guarantee higher level mods, and then I hit it pretty quickly after that, but they are really expensive. That should be it for gear, and this is a lot of talking. Moving on to gems and supports. Let's start with our combo and damage skills. Ice Nova, this is our Chilled Ground creator in our build. Chilled Ground is life. Get as much AoE as you can for it. If you're not in the campaign still, or you're in low tier maps, you can use freeze as a link since it'll actually freeze mobs there. In higher tier content it will not, so you can drop freeze. The best links are Magnified Area 2 and Encroaching Ground. You can also swap out Magnified Area 2 for Expand, depending on your playstyle and what you prefer. I'm using Expand currently. Honorable mentions and links that you can use in addition to these, depending on where you're at in the campaign or maps, or what your playstyle is, or what content you're running. Spell Cascade. It's really good. Gives you more frost ground area and can extend it. I wish it was easier to aim where the cascade was going to go, which is why it's just an honorable mention and not a best link. Astral Projection. It does give you less area of effect, but it lets you cast away from yourself. Also really good, especially for mapping. I always use Astral Projection when I'm mapping. Rising Tempest. I used that through the campaign and early maps to do some more damage so I can freeze and snap. Cold Mastery. It's just +1. It helps a little bit, but not a game changer. Prolonged Duration. That increases the time for your Chilled Ground. So by default, your Chilled Ground will last for 8 seconds. That increases it to more than that if you want your Chilled Ground to be around for longer than 8 seconds. Up to you. I'm sure there are probably some lineage supports here that could be good, but since all we care about is the Chilled Ground that Ice Nova makes, none of them really matter all that much. Snap is the next one on the list. I'm debating on whether or not to even keep this in here. I almost never use it now. I used it a ton in the campaign and early maps. It's a nice way of generating more cold infusions. But since I have increased my damage enough to where I pretty much one-shot everything with Navira's Fracturing, I don't really get a chance to use it on frozen enemies. And also, since mobs are so tanky now, their element threshold is so high, my Ice Nova doesn't freeze them anymore, so again, hard to snap. All that said, Magnified Area and Elemental Focus are must-haves in the campaign if you're using it for damage. Otherwise, use Harmonic Remnants or all three. Frost Bomb, the old exposure applier. The best links for this are Spell Cascade, Potent Exposure, and Overabundance 2. Some honorable mentions here. Prolonged Duration. That only applies to the exposure that it inflicts, so the exposure lasts longer. It does not apply to how long it takes it to explode. Harmonic Remnants, so you can get more cold infusions from them. Short Fuse, so it explodes faster. Magnified Area, so it's bigger and applies exposure to a larger area. Cooldown Recovery, so you can cast it more often. Or Second Wind, so you can throw out 2 sets of Frost Bombs at the same time. I'll let you decide what you want in here. It's really up to you. Short Fuse does hurt how much exposure you apply. By default, it has 10 pulses. Short Fuse brings you down to, depending on which Short Fuse you use. Short Fuse 1 brings you down to like 7 pulses, I think. so you're not going to get the full 60%. But it does give you faster infusions, which is nice, especially for mapping. I usually map with shorter fuse 1 socketed. I may even start using shorter fuse 2, just so I can get cold infusions faster, since nothing in a map is tanky enough for me to need 60% exposure on them. Moving on to Navira. Best sockets here are Bidding 2, Hulking Minions. You can get this on the passive tree for just, I think it's like 4 or 5 points away from where we're pathing. If you want to free up the support slot. There aren't a whole lot of support slots that are very useful for Navira, so the only reason I would do that is if I was going to go with Uhtred's Augury. But yeah, Hulking Minions is good. Cold Mastery or Minion Mastery or Diala's Desire is good. Concentrated Area. Fun fact, increases and reductions to area don't apply to the explosion from Navira's Fracturer. So the explosion will always be the size of the chilled ground, which means the concentrated area has no downside for this. It's only the more damage upside, which is nice. And Frost Nexus. This is used especially helpful in places where enemies spawn where you previously blew up enemies. It creates new sources of chilled ground to explode without needing to use cold infused Ice Nova. It's like Ritual or some strong boxes or Simulacrum. Frost Nexus is really helpful here. Some honorable mentions. There are a lot of these since this is our main damage skill. I got Rakiata's Flow in here. I do not know if this will work. It's untested. I'm too poor to afford it. I think it will, and if it does, you need to get rid of Elemental Weakness and every source of exposure. If you're going to use Frost Bomb to generate cold infusions, you need to not cast it on enemies. Otherwise, it's going to hurt your damage from Rakiata's Flow. So you can swap out Elemental Weakness for Enfeeble, which makes enemies do even less damage to you, making you even more tanky. Could be good. I don't know. We'll have to see. Like I said, there's a 50% chance that it's bugged and won't work. Deep Freeze is another good one. If you want to freeze bosses for longer, freeze. If you want more freeze buildup, Brittle Armor. This is an interesting route that I haven't tried yet. It's one that I'm going to try eventually. Since Kallari does physical damage, and quite a lot of physical damage, it can help you break armor, which can be used in conjunction with some other skills that use or interact with armor break. I haven't explored this route much, though, so that's still on my TBD. Tool Stillness. Unsure if this will work, since Kurgle's Leash doesn't work, but it's something that I want to try still. Varashta's Blessing. If you are going more focused on djinn skills and you're commanding a whole lot, Varashta's Blessing will go crazy. Uhtred's Augury. If you go with this, use it with just Bidding 2 and Concentrated Area, or however it works. I've never actually used this, so. But those are the two biggest damage multiplying supports, is Bidding 2 and Concentrated Area. Moving on to Kallari. I like Bidding 3 here since it means more uptime on crit weakness, and it gives us just enough time in our rotation to always be able to cast Kallari in between Ice Nova, Frost Bomb, and Navira's Fracturing rotations. So when we're not casting any of those three, we can just spam them with Kallari's Brutality. The daggers that pop up do damage and apply critical weakness. So yeah, that's nice. Magnified Area is good. It makes the dagger explosions bigger. Minion or Fizz Mastery or Diala's Desire for the +1. Brutality 3, also good, since it just makes it do more damage. There are probably other good support gems. I haven't experimented much with trying different Kallari skill gems. And then Discipline. I just have Upwelling 2 here. I don't know that there's any other links really that are good for Discipline. Barkskin, I have Upwelling 1 and Prolonged Duration. You can use Upwelling 1 and Upwelling 2 at the same time. There was a bug, but I believe it's been fixed now, where if you socketed Upwelling 1 after Upwelling 2, it wouldn't apply both to the djinn. It would to other minions, but not the djinn specifically. That seems to be fixed now, so it doesn't matter what order you socket them in. And then the last one is Blasphemy, the old Curse Aura setup. I use Temp Chains and Elemental Weakness. I also throw in Heightened Curse and Magnified Area. You can swap out Temp Chains for Enfeeble, but I really, really, really enjoy the enemies being really slow, so I highly recommend Temp Chains. That was a lot of stuff. That's just including all of my final findings, not the many, many hours and days of research and testing and bug finding that I've done. Let's talk about some other interesting things, a fact, if you will, like, what's the budget for this build? And that one's easy. I did tier 15 maps with garbage I picked up off the ground and rolled currency, or bought from a vendor, or bought cheap on the market and rolled to be better. I'd say you can do a budget version of this build that can handle 6 mod tier 15 maps deathless for around 3 to 5 div if you craft the items yourself. You could do it cheaper, maybe slightly more, and this video may make everything a lot more expensive. We'll see. But I think if I were to just have a level 80 sorceress with nothing on it, I could, for 3 to 5 div, I could start running 6 mod tier 15 maps and not die in them. I have spent significantly more than that, mostly on things that didn't pan out. I'd say my current gear is worth around 60 divines. I definitely did not spend that much crafting it, though, or even close to that. And almost all of that is my focus. Next interesting thing. What content can this run? The answer is everything, surprisingly. I wasn't expecting to beat tier 3 bosses with it, but I can. And it's pretty easy, and I did it without my super expensive focus. Next on the list, what's the catch? What's annoying on this build? Why does it only sound good and not bad? Surprisingly, very little is annoying with this build. Getting our action speed reduced doesn't feel terrible. Getting cursed doesn't feel terrible. Really, there's not a whole lot that feels bad here. I'd say the most frustrating things are probably figuring out how to scale damage, which I've scaled it enough that we can do pretty much everything. I don't know if we're going to kill Uber Arbiter with this. That may be out of our reach, but all of the other important stuff you can do with this. And then the second most annoying thing is needing infusions to create chilled ground. It feels pretty bad when you get to a nice juicy pack and realize that you're out of cold infusions. And then you gotta cast Frostbomb and wait a couple of seconds for Frostbomb to explode while the mobs are just moseying about really slowly. If there was an easier infusion generation, I'd have 0 complaints, or if there was an easier way to get chilled ground, I'd also have 0 complaints. I've thought about taking more freeze buildup nodes on the passive tree and some damage nodes to see if I can get coal infused Ice Nova to a point where it can freeze white mobs in higher tier content so that I can just snap those for infusions rather than having to rely on Frostbomb. But it seems like a waste of passive points to me when I could just be focusing on being an unkillable Giga Chad. We could potentially generate some power charges and use those instead with Frost Wall and Creeping Frost for generating chilled ground. But the chilled ground area on those is pretty small, so the clear feels bad. I did test it out a little bit. If anyone has a better idea than what I'm doing, I'd love to hear it. That said, it's still not bad. It doesn't feel terrible. It's just the most annoying part is generating infusions. If you're looking for a build where you just run and blast and don't think about anything at all ever and just spam a single button, then look for bows or crossbows. This build does require a little bit of thinking and a skill rotation, but it's a pretty small skill rotation compared to what it could be. And it is pretty easy to do. Alright, last couple of questions here. What if I want more damage? You can use an Ever-Grasping Ring instead of the generic rare rings with rarity I mentioned if you want to have crazy damage. You can get 2 30% rings without corrupting them. You can get even higher than that. Add Tool Stillness as a support for Navira, swap out Temp Chains for Despair, or use Rakiata's Flow and swap out Elemental Weakness for Despair. Just make sure that you're not hitting enemies with Frostbomb or reducing their resistances. And then you swap out the unique gloves for high resistance rare gloves, and that'll double your damage, maybe even more than double your damage. It'll be pretty difficult to get resistances, and it'll be pretty expensive to make the swap. But you should be able to get your resistances elsewhere. And at that point, you may want to go Chaos Inoculation, just so you don't have to worry about the extra Chaos damage that you'll be taking from those rings. And the final question, what about scaling spells in one weapon set and minions in another, like you talked about before? This latest patch that dropped after I recorded pretty much all of this video, so I'm adding this as an addendum. It seems to have fixed all of the clunkiness involved with swapping weapons and using djinn, so it's entirely possible that this is a viable build now. It's a cool idea and one that I want to explore for sure, but it's not covered in this build guide since I still need to do it. But the previous complaint I had about weapon swapping with djinns being clunky and buggy, it's all been fixed, so it is a good avenue to approach. I can't really think of anything else to add to this build guide. So if you have any questions or suggestions, please ask in the comments or pop into my Twitch stream if you see me online. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.